I collapsed at 78 pounds from hunger, and my mom poured water on the floor as I begged her for a sip. When I reminded her the law required her to give me water, she smirked. What law? Down here we make the rules, while the puddle seeped into the concrete. That was more than 10 years ago. This morning her hand shook so violently she could barely sign the confession that finally exposed her. You know, there are some things you never tell people, some secrets so dark they feel like a part of your bones. But I think it's time you hear how my own parents tried to starve me into submission, all for the crime of existing. They called it feeling the weight of your burden. For every dollar they spent on me, I had to fast for an hour. A $20 purchase? That meant almost an entire day without food. It started when I was just 8, small things at first, just skipping a meal here or there. But the message was clear. My very presence, my basic needs, were a debt I could never truly repay. By the time I turned 12, the rule was rigid, absolute. Soon I was fainting in class, the accumulated fasting hours piling up. Every single thing had a cost. Every meal I did eat, every pencil, every aspirin. My dad would sit at the dinner table, reading off receipts while I sat there, plate empty, watching them eat. $350 for milk you drank last week. $15 for those second-hand shoes. $4 for mandatory school supplies. My stomach would cramp, hours stacking up in my head. My mom, she even created spreadsheets tracking my consumption, circling the expensive areas. Always basic necessities. I spent every day paying for whatever they'd spent the day before. Sometimes the cycles overlapped and the fast would stretch for days. Once I needed antibiotics our insurance wouldn't cover, and I fasted for a full week. During those agonizing hunger periods, they'd make me write thank you notes, my hands shaking. Dear Mom and Dad, thank you for the $30 winter coat. I will gladly fast for 30 hours to show my appreciation. I became a walking calculator. A $2 notebook meant 2 hours of hunger. But failing class? That meant summer school, hundreds of dollars. Easy decision. But it wasn't always that clear-cut. I'd stand in store aisles doing the math, weighing how many more hours of emptiness I could endure, adding up what I'd already spent that day, what was unavoidable in the coming days. Sometimes I just put things back and walk out with nothing, knowing my body couldn't take another dollar. By 13 I was starving, utterly desperate. I'd wait until my mom seemed softer, usually after her evening wine, and just beg, please, just this once, I need tampons. I'm already 40 hours behind. She'd stroke my hair, so sympathetically, before explaining that suffering built character. We're making you strong, she'd say, while I just sobbed from hunger. Someday you'll thank us. When I threatened to tell the school what was happening, she just sneered. They'll think you have an eating disorder, like all the other girls your age who didn't have parents to teach them what a real problem feels like. While other kids complained about homework, I spent nights curled around my empty stomach, trying to sleep through the pain. I couldn't confide in anyone. I was so locked inside myself, so defined by my hunger, that I couldn't relate to other kids. If I ever went out, I'd make up excuses why I couldn't eat, or why I was gorging myself if it wasn't a fast day. Soon friends stopped inviting me anywhere. Teachers questioned my weight, but my dad had rehearsed answers ready. Growth spurts. Fast metabolism. The day I collapsed during gym class, the nurse found me at 78 pounds. She threatened to call Child Protective Services. My parents yanked me out of school so fast, I didn't even get to say goodbye to anyone. They claimed the state couldn't understand their advanced parenting methods. Homeschooling meant total control. No outside eyes to see me dying slowly, in calculated increments. Nobody I could turn to for help. When I was 15, my vision started failing from malnutrition. The eye exam cost $75, the cheapest glasses another $100. My dad announced it. 175 hours without food. Over a week of pure fasting. I knew my organs were already failing. Another week would just live me. That's when I started stealing. Granola bars from grocery stores, eaten in public bathrooms. Each stolen bite felt like rebellion and defeat all at once. I couldn't believe this was my life. Then one day I was hiding in the library, scarfing down stolen pretzels, and someone had left out a book on children's legal rights. That's how I learned that parents must provide food, shelter, and medical care unconditionally. My parents had lied to me my whole life. They'd said they didn't legally owe me anything. I copied the pages, my hands trembling, and brought them home. At dinner, while they enjoyed pot roast I couldn't touch, I laid the papers on the table. This is illegal, I told them. What you're doing to me is child abuse. My mom's fork clattered onto her plate. My dad's face went dark as he read. You ungrateful bitch, Mom whispered. After everything we've sacrificed for you. My father glared. Do you think I care what some book says? This is my house. I am the law. It turned out they'd seen my rebellion coming even before I had, and they were prepared. Dad opened the basement door to reveal a small bedroom he'd set up. In reality, it was more like a jail cell. A bare mattress, a bucket, stone walls. You think you're too good for our lessons? Mom grabbed my hair, yanking me toward the stairs. Let's see how your legal knowledge helps you down there. I fought back, but my malnourished body had no strength left. They dragged me down as I screamed for help no one would hear. The door slammed shut and I heard the lock turn. Mom's voice drifted through. We'll check on you in a week. By then, you'll be begging to show proper gratitude. Their footsteps faded upstairs. I pressed against the cold door, wondering if anyone would ever find me. The darkness pressed against me like a physical weight. I ran my hands along the walls, feeling for any weakness, any crack, any hope. The stone was smooth and cold, professionally sealed. They planned this carefully. My fingers found the bucket in the corner. The humiliation burned through me, even as my body shook from hunger. 78 pounds. The nurse had said 78 pounds. How much would I weigh after a week down here? I explored every inch of that basement prison. The mattress smelled like mildew. No blanket, no pillow. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, too high to reach. The switch must have been upstairs because I couldn't find any way to control it. They controlled even the light. Hours passed. Maybe time meant nothing in that stone box. My stomach had stopped cramping, which scared me more than the pain. When your body stops asking for food, you're dying. The lock clicked above. I scrambled to the bottom of the stairs as the door opened. Mom stood silhouetted against the kitchen light, holding a glass of water. She descended slowly, each step deliberate. At the bottom, she held out the glass. I reached for it and she pulled it back. First, apologize. My throat burned. For what? For your ungrateful behavior. For threatening us with your little library research. I stared at the water. One sip. Just one sip. But I knew this game. Given now and it would never end. The law says you have to give me water. She smiled and poured the glass onto the floor. The water spread across the concrete, soaking into the drain. What law? Down here we make the rules. She climbed back up and locked the door. I dropped to my knees, trying to lick moisture from the damp concrete. The taste of dirt and mold filled my mouth. The light stayed on, always on. I tried sleeping, but the brightness burned through my eyelids. When exhaustion finally took me, nightmares of endless receipts and calculating hours filled my head. Dad's visit came next. Or maybe it was the same day. He brought a notebook and pen. Write your apology. 1 page for each year we've raised you. 15 pages of gratitude. I took the pen with shaking hands. Started writing what they wanted to hear. Thank you for teaching me the value of money. Thank you for making me strong. Thank you for... The pen ran out of ink after 2 pages. That's unfortunate, Dad said. Looks like you'll need to try harder next time. He left me with the empty pen and notebook. I tried scratching words with just the tip, leaving grooves in the paper. Nothing they could read, nothing that would free me. The pattern emerged through their visits. Mom came with water I couldn't have until I showed proper gratitude. Dad brought writing supplies that always failed. They were playing with me, each visit designed to break me a little more. But I started hiding breadcrumbs of defiance. When Mom demanded I kneel before she'd speak to me, I'd count the seconds in my head. Made it a game. How long could I stay on my knees before my legs gave out? 23 seconds, then 30. Building strength even in submission. During Dad's visits, I studied him, really studied him. The way his left eye twitched when he was angry, how he favored his right leg from some old injury he'd never mentioned, the pattern of his breathing. Everything was data. Between visits, I exercised. Push-ups until my arms collapsed, sit-ups until my empty stomach screamed. I was dying, but I'd die strong. Die fighting. The water torture continued. Mom would bring a full pitcher, set it just out of reach, and lecture me about gratitude while I watched condensation bead on the glass. Sometimes she'd accidentally spill it near enough that I could press my face to the floor and lick the puddle. She'd watch with satisfaction as I degraded myself for drops. I started saving my saliva, letting it pool in my mouth instead of swallowing. It gave the illusion of moisture, a tiny rebellion they couldn't see. Dad's writing assignments grew more elaborate. Write about every sacrifice we've made for you. Start from birth. But the pens were always defective. Dry, broken, missing ink. He'd shake his head sadly at my empty pages and promise to bring better supplies tomorrow. I used the broken pens as tools, tried picking at the mortar between stones. I scratched tallies on the wall behind the mattress to track time. Each mark a promise I'd survive another day. The hunger had moved beyond pain into something else. A floating feeling. Sometimes I'd see things that weren't there, smell food that didn't exist. My body was eating itself. One visit, Mom brought soup. The smell nearly drove me insane. She sat on the stairs eating slowly, describing each spoonful. Chicken, carrots, noodles still warm. I pressed against the wall, trying not to watch, not to smell, not to want. All you have to do is admit you were wrong. Admit you're grateful for our lessons. Promise to follow the fasting rules without complaint. The words stuck in my throat. If I gave in now, I'd never get out. They'd know they'd broken me completely. I'm grateful, I whispered louder. I'm grateful for your lessons. She smiled and ate another spoonful. I don't believe you yet. Maybe tomorrow. The soup smell lingered for hours after she left. I pressed my face into the mattress, trying to escape it, but it had soaked into everything. Dad discovered my wall scratches during his next visit. His face went dark as he counted them. 7 marks. 7 days. Destroying property now. That's $100 repair. He knew what that meant. 100 hours over 4 days of fasting on top of however long they planned to keep me here. He made me watch as he photographed the damage, calculating the exact cost of materials and labor to fix my tiny scratches, the theatrical cruelty of it, the performance of reasonableness hiding pure sadism. I stopped marking days after that, stopped trying to track time. It only gave them more weapons against me. But the exercises continued in secret. Push-ups in the dark corner where they couldn't see from the stairs. Silent jumping jacks. Anything to keep my muscles from completely atrophying. My body was failing, but my will was hardening into something they hadn't expected. Mom's water games escalated. She'd bring ice cubes and place them just outside my reach, watching them melt into puddles I couldn't access. Sometimes she'd bring a damp cloth and wipe her face with it, sighing with relief at the coolness, while I burned with thirst. But I was learning too, learning their schedules. Mom always came after her morning coffee, her breath still bitter. Dad visited in the evenings after work, his shoes still carrying dust from outside. They were creatures of habit, and habits could be exploited. I started pretending to be weaker than I was, collapsed dramatically when they arrived, crawled instead of walked, let them think they were winning faster than they were. It made them careless. During one of Mom's visits, she set the water pitcher closer than usual, confident in my weakness. While she lectured about ungrateful children who didn't deserve parents who cared enough to teach hard lessons, I memorized the exact distance, the precise angle, the number of inches between my reach and relief. Dad brought a functioning pin once. A mistake, probably. He was tired, distracted by something at work. I wrote what he wanted, pages of groveling gratitude, all while memorizing the feel of the pen. Its weight, its balance, where he put it when he collected the pages. They thought they were teaching me dependence, but they were teaching me patience. Strategy. The kind of desperate cleverness that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. My body was shutting down. I could feel organs struggling, systems failing, but my mind was sharper than ever. Focused on one thing, survival. Not just of my body but of my spirit. They could lock me in this basement, but they couldn't lock up the part of me that refused to break. The game was changing. They just didn't know it yet. The visits became more unpredictable. Sometimes Mom would come twice in what felt like the same day. Other times the silence stretched so long, I wondered if they'd forgotten me entirely. The uncertainty was another form of torture. During one of Mom's water visits, I noticed something new. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the pitcher. Not from emotion, but from something else. The tremor was subtle, barely visible, but I filed it away. Every detail mattered now. I began testing boundaries in small ways. When Dad demanded I write apologies, I positioned myself differently each time. First near the stairs, then by the wall, then in the corner. He'd order me back to the center of the room, but I was mapping his comfort zones, learning where he felt safest, where he felt threatened. The hunger had evolved into something beyond physical pain. My body had adapted to starvation in terrifying ways. My heartbeat slowed to conserve energy. My vision tunneled when I stood too quickly, but my hearing had sharpened. I could track their movements upstairs, learning their routines through footsteps and floorboard creaks. Mom's next visit brought a new cruelty. She carried a tray of fresh fruit, the smell of strawberries and melon filling the basement. She sat on the stairs and ate piece by piece, juice dripping down her chin. When she finished, she left the tray just outside my reach, the fruit peelings taunting me. I waited until her footsteps faded completely upstairs before making my move. The tray was 3 feet beyond my reach, but I'd been practicing. I removed my shirt, tied one sleeve to my ankle, and used it like a rope to drag the tray closer. The peelings had tiny bits of fruit still clinging to them. I ate every scrap, even the strawberry leaves. This small victory energized me more than the negligible calories. I could still think, still plan, still fight. Dad's patterns revealed themselves through repetition. He always checked his watch exactly 3 times during each visit. Always touched the doorframe before descending. Always counted the stairs under his breath. Obsessive-compulsive tendencies I could use. I started leaving things slightly out of place. The mattress at an angle, the bucket moved an inch. Tiny disruptions to his ordered world. He'd notice immediately, his eye twitching as he corrected each imperfection. It gave me control over his emotions, even if just for moments. The broken pins became tools. I used the sharp tips to work at the mortar between stones, not to escape, but to create hiding spots, small gaps where I could conceal things. The fruit peelings became currency, saved and rationed for the darkest moments. Mom's tremor worsened with each visit. She tried to hide it, gripping the pitcher with both hands, but I saw during one water game, she fumbled and actually spilled some within my reach. I lunged for it, laughing at the puddle while she scrambled back up the stairs. Her control was slipping. I discovered the basement had a drain in the corner, old and rusted but functional. When they poured water on the floor to torment me, I started positioning myself to direct the flow. Not all of it reached the drain. Some pooled in the uneven concrete, creating tiny reservoirs I could return to later. Dad brought a camera during one visit, documenting my deterioration. He made me stand against the wall while he took photos from different angles. I could see him calculating, planning something. The camera became another weapon in his arsenal, but also evidence. Evidence of what they'd done. My exercises evolved. I couldn't afford to waste energy on movements they might see. So, I developed isometric routines, pressing against walls, tensing muscle groups in sequence. Invisible rebellion that kept my body from complete collapse. The light bulb became my enemy and ally. Always on, it disrupted my sleep, but also let me study every detail of my prison. I memorized each stone, each crack, each imperfection. The bulb itself was old, the filament visible through clear glass. I calculated how long it had been burning, how much longer it might last. Mom tried new psychological tactics. She'd bring my old belongings, things from my room, my favorite book, pages torn out, a stuffed animal from childhood, its stuffing removed. She'd describe how she was donating everything I owned, erasing my existence piece by piece. But her performance had cracks. When she held up a photo of me from healthier times, her hand shook so badly she dropped it. As she bent to retrieve it, I saw her pills fall from her pocket, small white tablets that scattered across the floor. She scrambled to collect them, but I'd seen the label. Medication for neurological tremors. Dad's visits became more erratic. Sometimes he'd just stand at the top of the stairs, watching me without speaking. Other times he'd pace the basement, muttering calculations. The cost of my imprisonment, the price of electricity for the light, the value of the food I wasn't eating. Everything reduced to numbers. I learned to perform weakness strategically. When I heard them approaching, I'd hyperventilate to make myself dizzy, then collapse at just the right moment. They wanted to see me broken, so I gave them a show while conserving my real strength for when it mattered. The notebook Dad left became useful in unexpected ways. I tore pages into strips, braiding them into rope, weak rope, but something. I practiced knots in the darkness, my fingers learning patterns that might someday matter. Mom's soup visits were the worst torture. The smell would linger for days, driving me to hallucinations. I'd see bowls of food floating in the air, smell bread baking when there was nothing. But I used these delusions as motivation. Each false feast reminded me why I had to survive. During one visit, Dad made a mistake. He set his keys down while adjusting the camera, just for a moment. They were too far to reach, but I memorized their shape, their number, the worn pattern on the house key. Information stored for a future I had to believe in. The basement had a rhythm. The house above had patterns. I learned when the furnace kicked on, when pipes rattled with water flow. These sounds became my clock, marking time in ways my captors couldn't control. I discovered that the drain connected to something. During heavy rain, I could hear water flowing below. The sound was distant but real. The basement wasn't as isolated as they wanted me to believe. There were connections to the outside world, even if I couldn't reach them yet. Mom's condition deteriorated alongside mine. The tremors affected her balance now. She gripped the railing with white knuckles during each descent. Her lectures about gratitude became shorter, less coherent. Sometimes she'd forget what she was saying mid-sentence. I started a new game. When she demanded I beg, I'd use specific words that seemed to trigger her confusion. Medical terms I'd overheard, phrases that reminded her of her condition. Her face would cloud and she'd leave faster, forgetting to complete whatever torture she'd planned. Dad noticed Mom's decline but said nothing. Their united front was cracking. During one visit, I heard them arguing upstairs, voices muffled but angry. The perfect family facade was crumbling, and I was both the cause and witness. The broken pins accumulated in my hiding spots. I'd found that the plastic tubes, when split, created sharp edges. Not weapons exactly, but tools. I used them to scrape at the concrete, creating rough surfaces that could catch and hold water. My body had found a terrible equilibrium, no longer losing weight because there was nothing left to lose. Organs functioning at the bare minimum. I'd become a creature of pure will, animated by spite and determination rather than calories. During a particularly cruel visit, Mom brought my report cards. She read my grades aloud, explaining how my education had cost them thousands, how aita was bought with their sacrifice. But as she read, I noticed she was holding the papers upside down. The tremors had affected her vision too. I played into her confusion, agreeing with grades that weren't there, thanking her for classes I'd never taken. Her frustration grew as reality slipped further from her grasp. For the first time I felt something like pity. Then I remembered the basement door locking, and the pity died. Dad's camera sessions revealed his own instability. He'd take the same photo dozens of times, never satisfied with the angle. His obsession with documentation had become compulsion. He needed evidence of my suffering. But no amount was ever enough. I learned to position myself to make his photos harder, turning slightly so shadows fell wrong, blinking at the moment of capture. Small rebellions that sent him into fits of perfectionist rage. He'd waste entire visits trying to get the perfect shot of my degradation. The basement walls had become my calendar, not with marks they could see, but with tiny scratches in hidden places. Each visit cataloged. Patterns emerged. Mom came every 36 to 48 hours. Dad every 24 to 30. The gaps were widening. During one water torture session, Mom's tremor caused her to drop the entire pitcher. It shattered on the concrete, sending water and glass everywhere. She stared at the mess, confused, then fled upstairs without a word. I spent hours carefully collecting the larger shards, hiding them in my growing arsenal. Dad's next visit brought a new horror. He'd calculated the cost of my existence from birth. Hospital bills, diapers, formula, every expense itemized in a ledger he read like scripture. The total was staggering, more hours of fasting than years of life. But his math had errors, numbers transposed, calculations repeated. His obsessive need for precision was failing him. I didn't correct him. Let him live in his false mathematics while I built my own equations for survival. The glass shards became tools for marking time in new ways. Tiny cuts on my fingertips, controlled and deliberate. Physical markers that couldn't be erased by confusion or tremors. My body was a record they couldn't edit. Mom's visits became more sporadic. Sometimes she'd open the door, stare down at me, then close it without entering. Other times she'd make it halfway down before retreating. Her fear was growing. Fear of the basement. Fear of what she'd created. Fear of me. I used her fear, positioning myself in shadows when I heard her coming, moving in ways that emphasized my skeletal frame, becoming the monster she'd made, reflecting her cruelty back in physical form. She'd wanted to break me. Instead, she'd created something that haunted her. Dad tried to maintain control through routine. Same time visits, same demands, same documentation. But routines could be disrupted. I'd pretend to be asleep when he arrived, forcing him to decide whether to wake me. Each decision revealed more about his psychology. The basement had taught me patience beyond human limits. I could remain motionless for hours, conserving energy while my mind raced through possibilities. Every visit provided new data. Every interaction revealed weaknesses. I was becoming something they hadn't anticipated. A student of their destruction. Mom's medication increased. I could tell by the severity of her tremors, the glassiness of her eyes. She'd sometimes call me by the wrong name, mixing me up with relatives I'd never met. Her grip on reality was loosening faster than my grip on life. During one visit, she brought baby photos, pictures of me as an infant, healthy and loved. She cried as she showed them, but I couldn't tell if she mourned that child or regretted what came after. The photos fluttered from her shaking hands, scattering across the floor. I collected them after she left. Not from sentiment, but for the information they contained. Background details, the layout of rooms I'd forgotten, faces of relatives who might still exist somewhere. Pieces of a life before the basement. Dad's documentation obsession escalated. He brought measuring tapes, recording my dimensions like I was livestock. The circumference of my arms, the width of my shoulders, all entered into his ledger with corresponding cost calculations. So many dollars per pound of flesh. But his measurements were inconsistent. Numbers that couldn't possibly be right. His need for precision warred with failing faculties. I watched him measure the same distance 3 times, getting 3 different results, his frustration mounting with each attempt. The light bulb finally showed signs of ailing, flickering occasionally. Each flicker sent Dad into a panic, checking his calculations for the cost of replacement. The thought of me in darkness terrified him more than my suffering. He needed to see his work. I began hoarding everything. Threads from the mattress, splinters from the stairs, even my own hair as it fell out in clumps, raw materials for plans still forming. The basement was teaching me that anything could be a tool if you were desperate enough. Mom's final coherent visit came on what must have been a Tuesday. I knew because I could hear the garbage truck outside. Its routine the only reliable marker of time. She sat on the stairs. No water pitcher, no food, just sitting. She tried to explain something, but the words tangled. Something about sacrifice and love getting confused. About meaning to teach strength but teaching something else instead. Her tremors were so bad, she could barely hold the railing. When she left, she forgot to lock the door. I stared at the open door for 3 heartbeats before Dad's footsteps thundered down. He slammed it shut, the lock clicking with finality, but we both knew what had happened. The perfect system was breaking down. His rage was cold and calculated. He added the cost of Mom's mistake to my debt. The seconds of open door translated to hours of fasting. But his math was more erratic than ever. Numbers that made no sense. Calculations that contradicted themselves. I'd stopped trying to stand when they visited. Not from weakness but from strategy. Let them think I was finished. Let them believe their victory was complete. While my body played dead, my mind was more alive than ever. The basement had become my teacher. Every surface memorized, every sound cataloged, every pattern analyzed. I knew which stones were loose, which stairs creaked, where water pooled, where shadows fell. Knowledge they'd forced me to gather through suffering. Mom stopped coming entirely. I could hear her upstairs sometimes, footsteps shuffling in random patterns. Dad's visits doubled, trying to maintain both roles. But he couldn't replicate her specific cruelties. His were all numbers and documentation. Hers had been personal. During what I calculated was my 40th day, based on the pattern of garbage trucks and furnace cycles, Dad made his biggest mistake. He brought a flashlight to check the corners of the basement, convinced I was hiding something. He was right, but he looked in the wrong places. The flashlight was heavy metal with fresh batteries. He set it down to adjust his camera just for a moment, but I'd learned that moments were all I needed. My skeletal hand shot out, not for the flashlight but for the batteries inside. By the time he noticed, I'd already hidden them. Batteries meant power. Power meant possibilities. I began working on the light bulb fixture, using the glass shards to strip wires when he wasn't visiting, not to electrocute anyone, but to control the light, to take back one small piece of agency. Dad's paranoia grew. He'd check the same corner 5 times, count the stones repeatedly, measure distances that hadn't changed. His need for control was consuming him, just as hunger had consumed me. We were both prisoners now, locked in a dance of mutual destruction. The house above grew quieter. Mom's footsteps had stopped entirely. Dad's movements were erratic, sometimes pacing all night. The perfect family had collapsed, leaving only the basement and its occupants. The jailer slowly going mad, and the prisoner who'd found clarity in starvation. I fashioned tools from everything. The batteries and wire created tiny shocks, useful for staying alert. The glass became cutting implements. The threads and hair made rope. The broken pins became picks. An arsenal built from garbage, invisible to eyes looking for traditional weapons. Dad's final documented visit showed his complete unraveling. He brought every receipt from my entire life, boxes of them. He spread them across the basement floor, trying to create some master calculation, the total cost of my existence. But the numbers wouldn't cooperate. They swam and shifted, defying his obsessive need for order. I watched him work for hours, neither of us speaking. His frustration mounted as calculations failed. Papers scattered, pen after pen running dry. He was trying to solve an equation that had no solution. How to balance love and cruelty, care and control. When he finally left, he took the receipts but left something crucial. Hope. Because in his madness, he'd revealed the truth. The basement door had 3 locks, but he'd only engaged one. His shaking hands, so focused on numbers, had betrayed him. I waited through another garbage truck cycle, another furnace rhythm. When I was certain he wouldn't return immediately, I made my move, not to the door, but to prepare. Every tool gathered, every piece of knowledge reviewed, every ounce of strength marshaled. The basement had been my prison, but also my education. It taught me patience, planning, and the price of survival. Now it was time to graduate. The next phase required careful timing. I'd learned their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. Mom's tremors had taken her out of the game. Dad's obsession had become his vulnerability. The perfect prison had imperfect jailers. I positioned my tools strategically. Glass near the stairs for distraction. Wire near the door for my real purpose. The flashlight batteries connected to create maximum shock. Everything in place for when the moment came, because it would come. Their system was unsustainable. Built on cruelty that had consumed them as much as me. The basement had made me into something they never intended. A survivor who understood them better than they understood themselves. The waiting was different now. Not the helpless waiting of a victim, but the patient waiting of a predator. I heard Dad's footsteps above, pacing in mathematical patterns, counting steps like he counted dollars, building equations that would never balance. The perfect family reduced to obsessive calculation and neurological decay. The light bulb flickered again. It would die, plunging us all into darkness. But I didn't fear the dark anymore. The basement had taught me to see without light, to know without seeing. Every surface, every distance, every possibility mapped in my mind. My body was destroyed, but my spirit was titanium, forged in starvation and neglect, shaped by cruelty into something unbreakable. They'd wanted to teach me a lesson about gratitude. Instead, they taught me about endurance. The next garbage truck would mark day 42, the perfect number for what came next. 6 weeks of education and survival. 6 weeks of learning their weaknesses. 6 weeks of planning my graduation from the basement university of suffering. I settled into position, conserving energy for what was coming. The game was almost over. The calculations nearly complete. The basement had one more lesson to teach. But this time I would be the teacher. The lock clicked above. Dad's footsteps on the stairs. Uneven now. His breathing labored from weeks of obsessive pacing. He descended into the basement, unaware that the power dynamic had already shifted. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. They needed me to be their victim more than I needed them to be my parents. Without me to torture, they had nothing. Without them, I had everything. The flashlight beam swept the basement, searching for violations of his order, finding none because I'd been careful. But he kept looking, driven by paranoia that something had changed. He was right. Everything had changed. I remained motionless, playing the broken doll he expected to see. Let him document my degradation one more time. Let him add figures to his ledger. Let him believe his control was absolute. The basement had taught me that belief was the greatest weakness of all. Because tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, he would make another mistake. The door would open, and when it did, I would be ready. Not with violence, but with the patient determination of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable. The basement had been my prison. Soon it would be my launching pad. The calculations were complete. The lessons learned. The student ready to surpass the teachers. Dad finished his documentation and turned to leave. 3 steps up the stairs, he paused. Something felt wrong to him. Some instinct warning that the prey had become predator, but he dismissed it, trusting in locks and walls and control. The door closed. The lock clicked, but this time I smiled because I'd heard what he hadn't. The second lock hadn't engaged properly. Mom's tremoring hands had damaged it during her last visits. Another crack in their perfect system. I gave him time to settle upstairs, to return to his pacing and calculating. Then I began my work, slow and careful, preserving energy for the moment when preparation became action. The basement waited with me. We'd become partners in this dark education. It had sheltered my transformation from victim to survivor. Now it would witness my final exam. The light bulb gave one last flicker, then died. Darkness flooded the basement, but I didn't panic. I knew every inch of this space. The darkness was my ally now, hiding my movements from any watching eyes. In the black silence I prepared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but I was ready. The basement had given me its final gift. The knowledge that I could survive anything because they'd already done their worst, and I was still here, still thinking, still planning, still fighting. The student was ready to leave school. The darkness became my workshop. I moved through the basement with purpose, gathering my tools by touch alone. The glass shards wrapped in torn fabric, the wire stripped from the light fixture, the batteries positioned for maximum effect. Each piece exactly where I needed it. Dad's footsteps paced above in their mathematical pattern. 17 steps east, pause, 17 steps west. The rhythm never varied anymore. His obsession had become predictable, and predictability meant opportunity. I tested the door mechanism in the darkness. The first lock engaged properly, but the second made a grinding sound when it tried to catch. The third hadn't been used in weeks. Dad's deteriorating focus had created the opening I needed. The furnace kicked on, masking any sounds I made. I worked the wire into the damaged lock mechanism, feeling for the weak point Mom's trembling hands had created. Metal scraped against metal. The lock resisted, then gave slightly. Progress measured in millimeters, but progress nonetheless. My fingers cramped from the delicate work. I paused, flexing them carefully, then resumed. Time meant nothing in the darkness. Only the work mattered. The lock would yield eventually. Everything yielded if you had patience. Dad's pacing stopped. I froze, still in the lock, listening. His footsteps moved toward the basement door. I slipped back to my usual position, hiding the wire in my palm. The door opened, spilling light down the stairs. He descended with a flashlight, sweeping it across the basement. I remained motionless, eyes closed, playing the broken creature he expected. The beam lingered on me, then moved to check his usual concerns. The mattress position, the bucket placement, the walls for new marks. Satisfied, he turned to leave. At the top of the stairs, he paused. I heard him testing the locks. 1 click, 2 clicks. The third lock remained unused. He muttered something about electricity costs and closed the door. I waited through 50 of his pacing cycles before returning to work. The wire found its way back into the lock mechanism. Push, twist, feel for the catch. My makeshift tools were crude, but the basement had taught me that crude tools in patient hands could accomplish miracles. The second lock finally gave. A soft click that sounded like thunder in the darkness. I held my breath, waiting to see if Dad had heard. His pacing continued unchanged. 17 steps east, 17 steps west. 1 lock remained. The easiest one, ironically. Dad engaged it out of habit, not security. A simple mechanism that would take seconds to defeat when the time came, but not yet. Preparation meant nothing without proper timing. I spent the next hours practicing movement in absolute darkness, from mattress to stairs, in complete silence, testing which stairs creaked and which held firm, memorizing the exact height of each step. My body might be skeletal, but it could still move with purpose. The garbage truck rumbled past. Wednesday morning. Dad would leave for work soon, his routine as rigid as his calculations. Mom hadn't moved upstairs in days. The house would be as empty as it ever got. I heard Dad's alarm, his footsteps to the bathroom, water running, the coffee maker gurgling. Each sound marking progress toward my window of opportunity. He never checked the basement before work anymore. Why would he? The prisoner was secure. The front door closed, his car started. I counted to 1,000, then began. The wire slipped into the first lock. My practice movements made quick work of it. The mechanism yielded like an old friend. I pushed against the door. It moved an inch, then stopped. Something was blocking it. I pushed harder, feeling the obstruction shift. A chair. He'd started barricading the door from the outside, but the chair was light, movable. Using the door as leverage, I worked the chair aside inch by inch. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite my body's inability to properly regulate temperature anymore. The chair scraped against the floor. Too loud. I paused, listening. No response from upstairs. Mom must be in one of her medication hazes. I continued working the chair aside until the gap was wide enough for my emaciated frame. 78 pounds had its advantages. I emerged into the kitchen, blinking against the light. Everything looked foreign after 6 weeks of stone walls. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked. Normal sounds that felt miraculous. My legs trembled as I stood fully upright for the first time in weeks. I gripped the counter, waiting for the dizziness to pass. No time for weakness. Dad would return for lunch in 4 hours. His routine never varied. I needed supplies, food, water, clothes, money. But first, I needed to ensure Mom couldn't interfere. I crept upstairs, each step careful and deliberate. Her bedroom door was open. She lay in bed, pills scattered on the nightstand, breathing shallow but steady. Her purse sat on the dresser. I found $43 in change. Her cell phone, car keys. I took it all. She stirred but didn't wake. The medication had her deep. My old room was exactly as I'd left it. Clothes still in the closet. I dressed in layers, hiding my skeletal frame. Everything hung loose, but it would do. I filled a backpack with essentials. More clothes, the hidden cash from my dresser drawer. $27 I'd saved from birthday cards. The kitchen demanded careful navigation. I couldn't eat much without making myself sick. Small bites of bread, sips of water. A banana that my stomach immediately rejected. I cleaned the mess, leaving no evidence. Dad's office drew me. His precious calculations had to be there. I found them immediately. Boxes of receipts, ledgers of my debt, the camera with its memory card full of basement documentation, evidence of everything. I took the camera in one ledger, proof if I needed it. Then I noticed his computer still logged in. His obsession with documentation extended to digital files, folders labeled with my name, years of spreadsheets tracking every penny spent on my existence. I inserted a thumb drive from his desk and copied everything. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 20%, 40%, 60%. Time ticked away, but I needed this evidence. The files finished copying. I pocketed the drive and moved to leave, then stopped. On his desk sat a framed photo. Our family years ago, before the calculations, before the basement. I looked healthy. They looked human. I left it there and headed downstairs. The front door beckoned, but I knew better. Neighbors would notice a skeletal teenager stumbling down the street. I needed a different exit strategy. Mom's car keys weighed heavy in my pocket. I'd never driven, but I'd watched. How hard could it be? The garage door opener was on the kitchen wall. I pressed it, wincing at the mechanical grinding. The car started on the third try. I adjusted the seat, barely able to reach the pedals. The gear shift confused me until I found drive. The car lurched forward. I slammed the brakes, heart racing. Deep breath. Try again. Gentle pressure on the gas. The car rolled forward. I made it to the street, turning randomly, just needing distance. Each intersection was a victory. Each mile a miracle. I drove until the gas light came on. A rest stop appeared ahead. I pulled in, parking crooked but safe. My hand shook as I turned off the engine. I'd done it. I'd escaped. But escape was only the beginning. I had $70, a car I couldn't legally drive, a body that barely functioned, and parents who would eventually notice their prisoner had graduated from their basement university. I found a payphone and dialed the only number I remembered. My aunt in the next state, Mom's sister, who'd stopped visiting years ago after some argument I'd never understood. The phone rang once, twice. She answered on the third ring. I managed 3 words before my voice cracked. She heard enough. An address. Promised to wait. Help was coming. I sat in the car, doors locked, watching the highway. Dad would be home in 2 hours. He'd find the empty basement. The missing evidence. The truth that his perfect system had failed. A truck stop diner glowed across the parking lot. My stomach cramped with emptiness, but I knew better than to trust it yet. Recovery would take time. Everything would take time. But I had time now. My own time, not measured in dollars in debt. An hour passed then too. Dad would be discovering the empty basement now. I pictured his face. The calculations that wouldn't compute. The control that had slipped away while he counted receipts. My aunt's car appeared as the sun set. She stepped out and I saw the shock register on her face. 78 pounds was harder to hide in person, but she didn't hesitate. She wrapped me in a blanket and helped me to her car. We drove through the night. She asked no questions, just handed me small bottles of water and crackers. I dozed between sips, my body finally believing it was safe enough to rest. I woke in a hospital room, for in my arm monitors beeping. A doctor explained refeeding syndrome, organ damage, long-term effects, but also recovery. Possibility. Future. The police came with questions. I showed them the ledger, the camera, the thumb drive. They took notes with serious faces. Adult Protective Services got involved. Paperwork and protocols. Systems designed to help, not hurt. My parents were arrested 2 days later. Dad had been found in the basement, surrounded by receipts, trying to calculate where his system went wrong. Mom was barely coherent. Her tremors so bad she couldn't hold a pen to sign her confession. The prosecutor said it was one of the worst cases of child abuse she'd seen. The systematic starvation, the psychological torture, the basement prison, all documented by Dad's own obsessive need to record everything. They both pled guilty. Dad got 15 years. Mom got 10 with mandatory medical treatment. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was too busy learning to eat again, to walk without falling, to exist without calculating the cost. Recovery wasn't linear. Some days I couldn't keep food down. Other days I ate until I was sick. My body still convinced each meal might be the last. Therapy helped, but trusting anyone took time. My aunt became my guardian. She never once mentioned the cost. Never calculated what I owed. She just provided, the way parents are supposed to. It felt foreign and wonderful and terrifying. I returned to school eventually. Different school, different state, different life. The other students had no idea why I was so thin, or why I sometimes stared at the cafeteria food like it might disappear. That was okay. My story wasn't for them. College felt impossible until a counselor mentioned scholarships for abuse survivors. I applied to 7, got 5, chose the one farthest from that basement, and studied nutrition of all things. Understanding the science of what had been done to me helped somehow. I graduated with honors. My aunt cried at the ceremony. I'd gained 40 pounds by then. Still thin but healthy, alive, free. Job offers came. I chose a position at a children's hospital working with kids who couldn't eat for medical reasons, teaching them that food wasn't the enemy, that their bodies deserved nourishment, that they were worth every penny spent on their care. Sometimes I still calculate costs automatically. Old habits die hard. But now I catch myself and buy the thing anyway. A coffee, a book, a winter coat that costs $30. No fasting required. My parents' house sold at auction. The basement was renovated, turned into a family room by the new owners. They had no idea what those stones had witnessed. That was probably for the best. I kept one thing from that life. The thumb drive with all of Dad's calculations, evidence of their sickness, but also proof of my survival. Someday I might delete it. Today isn't that day. The other survivors I've met all have different stories but similar scars. We recognize each other in small ways. How we hoard food. How we flinch at certain phrases. How we calculate escape routes even in safe spaces. But we also recognize the strength. The titanium spirits forged in suffering. The knowledge that we survive the unsurvivable. The basement taught terrible lessons. But it also taught me I could endure anything. My life isn't perfect. I still have health issues from the years of starvation. Trust comes hard. Relationships are complicated. But it's my life. Not measured in debt or dollars. Not controlled by anyone else's calculations. Every meal is a choice now. Every bite an act of rebellion against those who tried to starve me. I eat when I'm hungry, stop when I'm full. Simple freedoms that feel revolutionary. The basement is gone from my life but not from my dreams. Sometimes I wake in darkness feeling for stone walls, but then I turn on the light. See my own apartment, my own space, my own life. The relief never gets old. I volunteer at a crisis hotline twice a month, talking to kids who see no escape, who believe their parents' lies about what they deserve. I tell them about legal rights, about survival, about the possibility of graduation day. Some listen, some don't. But I keep answering the phone, keep sharing what the basement taught me. Not the cruelty but the endurance. Not the starvation but the strength that comes after. My story isn't unique. Too many basements, too many calculations, too many children learning their expensive burdens. But survival stories need telling. They're proof that the basement doesn't have to be the end. I'm 32 now. Healthy weight, stable job, good life. The girl who weighed 78 pounds feels like a different person. But I carry her with me. She's the reason I survived. The reason I fight. The reason I know that no matter how dark the basement, graduation day is possible. The cost of my existence? Immeasurable. The value of my survival? Priceless. The basement taught me math, but I've learned better equations since. Ones where every life has infinite worth, where children are investments, not debts. Where love doesn't require payment. My parents are eligible for parole next year. I won't attend the hearing. I've said everything I needed to say. The basement spoke for me. The evidence convicted them. My survival is testimony enough. I eat dinner now without calculating. Sleep without hunger. Live without debt. The basement is behind me, but its lessons remain. I survived. I escaped. I graduated. And that diploma is mine to keep.